Germany has long been one of the most sophisticated public sector IT markets in the world. And in 2026, that sophistication has translated into a decision that is going to reshape how millions of German civil servants work every day. The German state of Schleswig-Holstein announced in late 2024 its intention to migrate its entire public administration to Linux and open source software, a decision that has been elaborated through 2025 and early 2026 into a detailed multi-year implementation plan. In parallel, other German states have signaled their intention to follow, and the federal government has begun preparing frameworks that would support similar migrations at the national level. This is not one state making a decision. It is the early stages of what looks like a coordinated, nationwide shift. Microsoft has reacted, and the reaction, while less sharp than the company's response to France, has still been substantive enough to warrant analysis. I want to walk you through what is happening in Germany, how it differs from what is happening in France, and what Microsoft's response tells us about the company's strategic posture. Let me start with the specifics of the Schleswig-Holstein migration, because the details ground the broader story. Schleswig-Holstein is a northern German state with roughly 3 million residents and about 30,000 public sector workstations across its various ministries, agencies, and local administrations. The migration, announced by Digital Minister Dirk Schroeter, is scheduled to begin with the state ministries in 2026 and to extend across local administrations through 2027 and 2028. The target stack is familiar. LibreOffice replaces Microsoft Office. Nextcloud replaces parts of the Microsoft 365 collaboration suite. Thunderbird replaces Outlook. OpenXChange provides email and calendar infrastructure. The desktop operating system is a hardened Linux distribution, with the specific choice still being finalized, but with Ubuntu and OpenSUSE both under active consideration. The reasons for the Schleswig-Holstein decision have been articulated clearly and publicly by the minister and by the state's digital strategy documents. 3 reasons have been emphasized. The first is cost. The state projects meaningful savings over the lifetime of the migration, primarily by eliminating Microsoft licensing fees. The second is sovereignty. The state has explicitly framed the migration as a matter of digital sovereignty, noting the risk of dependence on a foreign vendor whose practices and policies can change without consultation. The third is what Schroeter has called innovation capacity. Open source software, the state argues, allows for customization and adaptation that proprietary software does not, and this flexibility is seen as an enabler of long-term innovation in public services. What distinguishes Schleswig-Holstein's announcement from earlier German experiments, including the well-known case of the city of Munich, is the level of coordination with other German actors from the outset. Schleswig-Holstein is not going it alone. The state is working with the Federal IT Agency, with other German states that are considering similar moves, and with European-level coordination bodies. The goal is explicitly to build a migration template that can be used by other jurisdictions, with the understanding that a cross-German migration will be stronger than individual state-level efforts. This is the lesson of Munich applied in reverse. Munich failed in part because it was alone. Schleswig-Holstein is designing its migration to be coordinated from the start, which makes it more resilient to the political pressures that undid Munich. Other German states have moved in similar directions, at varying paces. The city-state of Hamburg has announced smaller-scale migrations of specific agencies. Bavaria has signaled interest, but has not committed to a timeline. Berlin, the federal capital, has been running pilot programs for several years. North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany's most populous state, has undertaken a review that is expected to produce recommendations in late 2026. None of these states is yet at the Schleswig-Holstein level of commitment, but the general direction is consistent across most of them. German public sector IT is trending away from Microsoft. At the federal level, the German government has been more cautious but also supportive. The Federal Ministry of the Interior, which coordinates federal IT policy, has expressed support for state-level migrations and has committed to providing technical assistance for any state that wishes to pursue one. The Federal Office for Information Security has published hardening guides and security recommendations for the open source stack. that German public administrations are most likely to deploy. The federal procurement rules have been adjusted to give open source alternatives more consideration in procurement decisions, which has lowered the bureaucratic friction for agencies that want to choose open source. Microsoft's reaction to the German activity has been, as I mentioned, somewhat different from its reaction to France. The company has been less publicly vocal and has maintained a lower-key profile. There have been no major public statements of regret, no equivalent to the French language statement Microsoft issued after the DNAM directive. The company's engagement with German customers has been more quiet, more individual, and more focused on retention of specific accounts rather than on public positioning. The reasons for this different approach are probably several. Germany has a more distributed IT decision-making structure than France, which makes broad public statements less effective. There are 16 German states plus hundreds of local administrations, and each makes its own decisions about IT. A blanket public statement is less useful when the target audience is fragmented. Microsoft's approach has been to work account by account, engaging with specific decision makers, offering specific terms, and attempting to slow or deflect migrations at the granular level. Microsoft has also invested, in Germany specifically, in partnerships with German companies and institutions. The company has announced expanded operations in Germany, including new cloud, data centers, new partnerships with German research institutions, and new educational programs. These investments are, in part, a strategic response to the sovereignty concerns that are driving migrations. By embedding itself more deeply in the German economy, Microsoft hopes to become harder to dislodge and easier to defend as a partner, rather than as a foreign vendor. The German government's internal analysis, as reflected in various published documents and in academic research on German digital strategy, suggests that Microsoft's approach is partially effective. Some German public sector customers have accepted Microsoft's expanded commitments and have decided to continue with Microsoft products for the foreseeable future. Other customers have remained on their migration paths. The pattern appears to be that customers whose primary concern is cost can be retained with pricing concessions, while customers whose primary concern is sovereignty are harder to retain because the concern is structural rather than commercial. What is happening in Germany, taken together with what is happening in France, Denmark, and other European countries, represents the most significant restructuring of the European public sector IT market in decades. The specific outcomes will vary by country and by jurisdiction, but the overall direction is toward more open source, less Microsoft, and greater European sovereignty over the technology stack that supports government functions. Microsoft is responding to this shift, but the response is primarily defensive. The company is not in a position to stop the shift or to reverse it. The best available strategy is to slow it, to preserve as much of the existing business as possible, and to position the company well for whatever long-term equilibrium emerges. For users and observers, the German activity is worth watching for several reasons. Germany has a particularly strong tradition of public sector IT sophistication, and decisions made in German public administration tend to influence IT thinking across Europe. German public administrations are large, complex, and demanding customers, and if they can successfully migrate, that is strong evidence that similar migrations are possible elsewhere. German expertise in open source IT is deep, and the tools and processes that are developed in Germany will be useful to other organizations around the world. For German specifically, the implications of the migrations are mixed. In the short term, civil servants will need to learn new tools and adapt to new workflows. This will be disruptive, and the disruption will not be evenly distributed. Some workers will adapt quickly, others will struggle. The success of the migration depends on how well the transition is managed. The German administrations have, so far, been investing heavily in training programs, change management, and support resources, which suggests they understand what is required. But execution at scale is difficult, and the results will only become clear over time. For the broader European context, the German activity reinforces the pattern that France established. Multiple major European countries are moving in the same direction. The coordination among them is increasing. The tools, the training programs, the institutional knowledge are accumulating. The barrier to entry for any new country considering a similar move is lower than it was when France and Germany started. This is the compounding dynamic of platform shifts. Early movers bear the highest costs. Later movers benefit from the ecosystem that the early movers build. As the ecosystem grows, the economic argument for joining it strengthens. Microsoft is aware of all of this. The company's internal planning, as I discussed in earlier videos, reflects a realistic assessment of the trend and a strategic response focused on minimizing damage rather than reversing the direction. This is pragmatic and, in my view, appropriate. Companies that accurately assess the direction of their markets and position themselves for the future are generally more durable than companies that engage in denial. Microsoft has shown this kind of strategic flexibility before, particularly in its pivot from desktop-focused business to cloud-focused business, and the company is, by its internal documents, applying similar thinking to the European public sector shift. Where this ends is still uncertain. The best-case scenario for Microsoft is that its concessions are enough to retain most of its European public sector business, with a gradual loss of share that is manageable within the broader corporate portfolio. The worst-case scenario is that the migration accelerates faster than Microsoft expects, that it spreads from Europe to other regions including Canada and parts of Asia, and that Microsoft's global government business erodes significantly. The actual outcome will likely be somewhere between these poles, and it will depend on factors that are difficult to predict, including how well the early migrations execute, how regulatory environments evolve, and how the competitive ecosystem of open-source alternatives matures. Subscribe for continuing coverage of the European migrations. I will follow Schleswig-Holstein's implementation as it progresses, and will report on the decisions other German states make in the coming year. In the comments, tell me what you think the tipping point looks like. Is there a specific threshold at which the shift becomes self-sustaining and impossible to slow? Or is the shift likely to proceed at a gradual and bounded pace for a long time? I am genuinely uncertain about this, and the informed speculation of the community is, I find, often more insightful than my own reasoning.